Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. Before we start and talk about CBD, how many of you out there are already selling CBD in your store? All right, so already 90% of you are already selling CBD. So we'll talk about how to really engage that aspect with your patient and then upsell, and then as well as other services that we could actually add to benefit your patients, right? At the end of the day, whether you sell this or you sell vitamins, end of the day you have to focus on the patient care and what's going to really drive your patients to come to you and really differentiate yourself. So one thing that we're going to talk about is guiding patients in the use of hemp-based CBD. And one of the things that I end up having to sometimes cringe is that there's too many brands of CBD companies out there, is one. Two is that there's too many bad informations on CBD that we want to really dive into, get the right information, at the same time realizing that you need to be well educated in this space to educate the public, as well as being that specialist who specializes in CBD. And that's where the make it or break it part of a successful CBD practice versus not. I got into CBD practice because out of a necessity. 5 years ago, actually more than 5 years ago, excuse me, I ended up having a heart attack at the age of 33 and found that I actually had a Bartonella infection, which led to 2 years of treatment and having to go through that. The biggest issue that I actually had was suffering from insomnia, pain, anxiety issues. And one of the things that really helped to really hone in and actually helped to treat a lot of the issues that I actually had was using CBD. The issue that I actually had was actually had wrong information about choosing the right CBD company, and there was a lot of trial and error. So I don't want you to make those mistakes that I made and able to get the right brand, the right question you should be asking with your CBD company, and more. So just to give you a financial disclosure, just as Chuck has mentioned, I'm an owner of Robinson Drug and Compounding Center. I am from New Jersey. If I have a funny accent, I am from New Jersey. So that's the end of that. And as well as I'm a Chief Scientist Officer for InView Botanical CBD. And this is my boring bio. And the objective for today is to discuss about the history overview of cannabis in medicine. We actually have a long history of utilizing cannabis extract in our pharmacy world. Unfortunately, after the 1930s, we weren't allowed to do so because of a lot of bad information within the government officials, especially the three-letter agencies, as well as the fact that some of the key things that we could have used to treat patients and help them was basically taken away. Secondarily, we want to talk about what the differences are between hemp, marijuana, and other cannabis extracts. What are the chemical substances that we have to look at, so such as phytocannabinoids, and as well as the pharmacology of CBD. There's well over 160 phytocannabinoids within a plant called hemp. There's no way for me to discuss all of those things, so we're going to just narrow it down to CBD, which is very popular, but we'll talk about how that all interplays in terms of getting the best therapeutic outcome possible, as well as what type of form to use within the pharmacy, as well as look at the extraction science, right? There are several companies using CO2 extraction versus ethanol extraction. What are the difference? Why is it better? Well, there's no right or wrong in terms of using those different extractions, but we want to really teach you what those will be, as well as discussing the indication, finding the right dosage form, and etc. And I will also teach you at the end in terms of what I did to actively market CBD practice within your community, so this way you could help a lot more patients just rather than just selling CBD. So the history part of it is that there's a long history of using cannabis in human, right? Even along with the Copper Age and then the Bronze Age, right? Well before our times, cannabis was already documented to be used within our society, right? And the first medically documented case actually happened in the 2nd century CE, where in Chinese medicine they already knew the overall benefit and the side effects of cannabis, as well as in ancient Egypt. And if you look at in terms of just even more, there was documentation of different strain of cannabis end up having to affect different ways, such as if you use a male form of cannabis, it is a good way to get industrial hemp, such as fibers and cloth and papers and etc., whereas the female part of the plant would end up having to give you that intoxicating effect from the THC. Now, if you see this picture right now, I didn't get that picture from anywhere. Okay, I actually got that. I took it in Barcelona, Spain. There is a marijuana museum in Spain where I visited, and lo and behold, who made that bottle? Park Davis, right? I've talked about the long history of cannabis extracts being utilized in our apothecary world before, but the problem was that this particular history has been completely hidden from us and not being well discussed about, because there is a documented USP pharmacopoeia of cannabis extract of indica and sativa and the extraction process and etc. on top of well over 100 documents of scientific documents in Europe and America that's already been widely available. But the problem is that the history in itself is completely hidden from us, and so there's a lot of conspiracy behind it. But I want to really bring you out to a fruition that, you know what, it is our place in time to get involved in hemp-based CBD, because our overall root of pharmacy comes from utilizing different forms of cannabis extract. And in terms of once this has been completely federally legalized pretty soon, especially independent pharmacies should be a way forth of providing medical marijuana for your patients. You may agree or disagree, but that's going to come in. And this is where you guys want to differentiate that, you know what, you're the experts in doing this. So before we go into the old nitty-gritty of CBD, everything else, we want to talk about the plant, Cannabis sativa. So what is that? It is actually family very related to the hops family. Hops, what would we use that for? To flavoring and putting aroma into our beer. Well, it's closely related relative to hemp and other cannabis-related plants. And the crazy thing about the medicinal compounds of cannabis is produced not within the stalk or the leaf or anything like that. It's actually produced within the flowers of the actual cannabis plant. So if you look at the bottom picture right now, that's the flower of a cannabis plant. If you zoom it in, you see that little phalanges. Those are called trichomes. And that is where the overall production of different resins of phytocannabinoids within also terpenes, which is our basically essential oils from the plant. So if you end up having to take a rind of a lemon and you twist it and you see that zest coming through, that's basically essential oil from a fruit, right? You could get essential oils from different plants and extracts. We already know that, right? Well, same aspect in terms of using cannabis, you have different terpenes or essential oils coming from that, and that also produces different forms of pharmacological effect in your body. As well as in terms of the overall activity of the trichomes, it also provides an antioxidant activity, so it actually helps to protect the plant. Also actually has an antimicrobial activity. Also contains that 160 cannabinoid profile. We talk about CBD, it's just a small picture of it. THC, you have CBG and everything else that right now, although we are able to identify 580 different natural compounds within the plant, we still have not gotten all the knowledge or all the research out right now how these are all interplaying in our body to actually help us. And obviously the opportunities are endless, right? And then if you talk about the plant of cannabis in itself, how you grow it is all depending on, and as well as the quality of the cannabis, is all dependent on the environment, where you grow it, how you grow it, what kind of soil you're actually working with, as well as what I pointed out, the environment actually having a low humidity, right? Little bit of rainfall, increasing UV radiation. That UV radiation is going to really drive up that quality and the profile of the terpenes along with the phytocannabinoids you're going to get. Okay, so there's a difference between a hemp that's grown poorly versus where it should be grown in an ideal situation. You're going to get a higher level of CBD. As well as there are potential issue dealing with different pathogens within the cannabis plant itself. So severe toxigenic fungi, especially penicillium and aspergillus, these has to be looked into when you are working with your CBD company. Or even let's just say you decide to get a bud of a flower of a cannabis, because you actually can be having to deal with some of these pathogens which can be dangerous to a lot of people. If you're talking about cancer patients where they may have to use medical marijuana and they may have to smoke it or they may have to cook with it, whatever they have to, if these type of flowers are not checked for potential pathogens such as a fungi issue, that could end up having to potentially hurt the patient. So again, quality testing, right, where you source it is very, very important. And so even if you decide to work with a separate, different CBD companies that you're working with right now, are you asking the right questions in terms of quality you're looking for? Are you asking for the microbial testing? Are you looking for potential heavy metal toxicity that could occur within the finished product, right? Are you looking for solvents? Things like that we will discuss a little more, but I just want to get you to be aware that testing in itself is very, very important, okay? Including the cannabis varieties are different as well. There are 3 different types of medical varieties of cannabis. There's type 1, which is THC dominant, okay, that's more than medicinal marijuana, where you get it from a dispensary. Type 2 is both THC and cannabidiol, which is CBD, or basically called a hybrid. And then you have the type 3, which is CBD dominant, that's basically hemp. And that's what's being a lot more popular these days. And based on the regulatory process, there's no real difference of a marijuana or hemp when you look at it together. The only difference is that the level of THC is quite different. The legal limit of THC within a hemp plant, as you probably already know, is 0.3% by weight, right? And then you look at, going down further, there's a strands of cannabis as well. There's different strands. So there's a type 1 strand of cannabis, which is called a sativa, that produces more that upbeat feeling, right? There's some people who are smoking or taking sativa form of cannabis to actually help to focus, to help deal with anxiety issues in certain cases. There are hybrids available where you have a different concentration of THC and CBD working together. And then there's a type 3, indica, which is able to help with sleep issue. What the difference is that there are different terpene profile within these aspects that is going to give you that upbeat feeling or end up having to give you that relaxation feeling going on. So before we go into anything else, we have to be educated about the endocannabinoid system, or the ECS. ECS in itself is a master of all systems in our body. Matter of fact, even before our brain is actually formed, our ECS system gets developed even first. And so if you look at the body system, you have the nervous system, renal, digestive, etc. Endocannabinoid end up being the master system that controls all that. It regulates various physiological, cognitive process, such as appetite, pain, including libido, right? Orgasm, things like that. Sexual function has actually been derived and controlled through the ECS system. Even the ECS, there are our own endocannabinoids that our body's already making, right? It's an untapped feature that we are already not utilizing and not having the fully understanding, is that our own body's ECS system is there to help us achieve something called a homeostasis. So you have something called anandamide, and then you also have something called 2-AG. So they roll the ECS system to produce harmony, right? Homeostasis, and including balancing out your immune system and able to achieve a certain amount of anti-inflammatory effect as well. So stability is the key of the game of the ECS system. And as well as within the ECS system, there are 2 main receptors. It's called the CB1 and then CB2. They're part of the G protein coupled receptors. And what CB1 is primarily located within the CNS, which we thought, now we're finding that it's actually located within the peripheries as well, such as our heart and as well as reproductive system. And then you actually have the CB2 receptor primarily within the immune system to regulate that, as well as found in different peripheries, again, different organs as well, and it has a different effect of it. So why ECS is there? Again, is to produce what? To produce a homeostasis. And it's also dependent on the fact that you need to have a good amount of nutrients to support that ECS. If you look at the right-hand side of it, and the cannabinoid, on the bottom of it, you have 2 endocannabinoids our body's already producing. But if you look at it right now, it's heavily dependent on our overall fatty acid intake. Why this is important is that it's just not about the ECS system, it's all about the holistic approach that you have to take with your patients as well. You have to talk about getting the right nutrients, do you have the right amount of fatty acid intake, including the fact that the overall ECS system is dependent on a vitamin D pathway as well. So you need to have an adequate amount of vitamin D, right? Vitamin D actually helps with the immune system. So does the ECS, right? That all plays into effect. So what I usually do in our pharmacy these days is when I sell a bottle of CBD, I may end up having to recommend getting vitamin D and as well as omega fatty acids that you can end up having to sell to the patients. And this could be very, very helpful in achieving that overall optimal ECS function in looking at healthy inflammation response, sleep, memory, and etc. So again, holistic approach is the key of the game, and this is where we could differentiate ourselves between other pharmacies or other people that are selling CBD. And including the ECS system, I talked about the CB1 and CB2, right? If you're looking at these type of receptors, you have to look at more in that key to a lock approach, right? The key is our phytocannabinoids you get from the THC, CBD, and CBN. The key thing is that the THC is able to bind to the CB1 receptor, and we understand that it can cause some of the euphoria effect, right? And the highness you get. But the CBD is able to work against the THC to kick that off of the CB1. A lot of people have the misunderstanding that CBD is able to bind to the CB2 receptor. That's not the case at all. It actually works indirectly to activate that CB2 receptor to create it in controlling your inflammation and as well as the issues that could be controlled within the immune system utilizing the CB2 pathway. Right? So this is the key difference. Now, how does that connect it? It's connected by the CBN. So again, it's not just about the single profile of the phytocannabinoid. You have to look at the holistic approach of CBD, THC, as well as CBN, and other phytocannabinoids, along with the terpenes, to produce the best therapeutic effect. And these are the things that are sometimes are not talked about, and someone is misleading based on some of the information I see on social media and as well as the internet. So we talked about how both THC and CBD is binding to the CBD receptor. Well, they're competing. And what THC does is actually is a more that agonistic, is able to activate that receptor, but CBD actually has a negative effect to alter the shape of the CB1 receptor to kick that off and have an opposite effect. And another thing that actually is good for is if a patient ends up having to overdose on THC, which can actually occur, CBD can be a great tool to reverse that effect, right? Right now, if you look at emergency medicine, if a patient ends up having to overdose on THC, just let it be. But they could be having a detrimental issue. So in certain cases, you could use a high dose of CBD to reverse the effect of THC. And because of the different effects that it actually has. And so in the conclusion of that is cannabinoids are able to bind to different receptors to produce agonistic and it was an antagonistic effect, and that's all depending on the different types of phytocannabinoids that work in the body itself. So cannabidiol, right, CBD. So CBD in itself is a 65 distinctive pharmacological targets in our body to alter our receptors, to work with the ion channels, including enzymes and different transporters. And also actually has a strong pleiotropic, meaning that it's able to alter, able to balance out the immune system as well as certain physiological activity in our body as well. And remarkably, CBD is quite safe. Right? You have to take well over 1,500 milligrams a day to even cause any toxicity or including liver toxicity. So pharmacology of CBD is another aspect is they're working on different receptors as well. So CBD can actually work with our serotonin system to help with the common mechanism to deal with anxiety, reducing certainly brain ischemia, reducing nausea issues and improving cognition. And as well as it helps to increase the sociability aspect of it, decreasing impulsivity, and also drug-seeking behavior. So in our pharmacy, we actually have a compounding practice that we compound something called low-dose naltrexone, but on top of that, we utilize CBD to decrease patients actually suffering from opioid withdrawal to decrease that craving, and CBD works really well for that purpose. And we've seen that anecdotally and as was in a clinical experience. And another thing is, if you actually have a key point, I don't know if I could even say it, but if you are having some type of smoking cessation program in your pharmacy, CBD can be a great matter they could add into in terms of helping to treat some of the craving that patients end up having to deal with. So it's helped to really provide that balance and the calmness that you're looking for. Another thing that CBD does is actually works with the adenosine receptor to regulate heart function, inflammation, as well as the dopamine receptors as well. And one of the key things is that CBD, this is actually more within that rat model study, is that it actually helps to prevent irregular heart rhythm as well. Now, just because you see in a rat model study does not equal to, it could be translated into the humans, because in terms of the CB2 receptor, there's about, I think, 92% similarity in the CBD receptor between a rat and a human. So a lot of times when you look at these type of studies, looking at animal model, doesn't really translate well to humans. So you have to take it for a grain of salt and just kind of see that it may end up having to be helpful, and that this could be translated and as well as explained to patients as well. One of the key things about the adenosine receptor is that it is anti-inflammatory, as well as has a potential neuroprotective effect. So especially for Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, right, including MS, this could be one of the good ways to kind of add it in there. There's also effect on the glycine receptor to modulate neuropathic pain and inflammation. Actually has an antispasmodic activity as well. Works on the dopamine receptor to actually help to deal with a psychotic event the patient ended up having to have. So obvious reasons, you can't just recommend CBD to a patient who's dealing with schizophrenia, but it's a good talking point to talk with the doctors about, could we add CBD as an adjunctive therapy for patients dealing with schizophrenia or any other mental health disorders. There's also effect on the GPR55 receptor, that's more the key anti-inflammatory effect, and able to reduce neural excitability. So again, help with the brain protection, potential issue dealing with Alzheimer's disease, and working with different ion channels to help deal with potentially, patients dealing with dealing with seizures, as well as working with inflammatory process. There are different ways to do it. So again, CBD right now, we don't have a full understanding of it, but so far it's been very, very good for our patient that's going to get the best outcome possible with this. And we talked about before in transitioning and getting into the CBD products that we're going to talk about. Before we get into that, we have to kind of look at what entourage effect is, right? Entourage effect, it's about utilizing the full potential of a plant, looking at the phytocannabinoids, along with the terpenes, the fatty acids, and other compounds. We talked about there's well over 500 different compounds that have been identified within the plant itself. What those things can actually produce a synergistic effect to produce the best therapeutic option possible, while reducing the side effects, as well as, in my clinical practice, what I've seen is that is able to reduce the potential issue dealing with a drug interaction. A lot of you probably know that CBD is a cytochrome P450 inhibitor, right? Especially the 3A4 enzyme. When you're using a CBD isolate, and this is one thing that's been well documented by GW Pharma with their product called Epidiolex, is that it can inhibit the cytochrome P450 pathway. But when you look at the overall matter dealing with the full spectrum aspect, whereas the GW Pharma is a CBD isolate, full spectrum CBD oils, you're looking more that full plant approach, and so the overall issue dealing with side effects along with the drug interaction profile is much, much less, because you're using a little bit of everything to derive into producing that overall effectiveness that you're looking for. So this is a key difference. And on top of that, we talked about entourage effect. It can be very, very helpful in terms of how you dose a patient, right? So when you're using a full spectrum product, the dosing is much less compared to just utilizing CBD isolates. And there's a huge benefit in that sense of that as well. And I'm not saying that not to use CBD isolates that you see, right? Because we are all understanding the issue behind, different issue dealing like THC. I know certain states that cannot have any legal limit of THC, but you know what? There are other options, and you have to be aware of what kind of products you're dealing with, as well as what you could use for your patients as well. Any questions so far? Yes?
You had mentioned that the CBD isolate at 1,500 milligrams could be potentially hepatotoxic.
Yes, sir.
The full spectrum hemp extract company that I use has a 2,000 milligram dosing. How does that compare to the isolate?
Is that 2,000 milligram per bottle of a 30 mLs? That could be it. I don't think, so this is the misleading part. I mean, I could talk about the end of it all, but sometimes you're dealing with different CBD companies and they're like, oh, I have 1,000 milligrams of CBD in our bottle, of a tincture. Of what? 1,000 milligrams of 30 mLs, or is it 1,000 milligrams per ml? It's a huge difference. So you have to look at that and then see what it is. I mean, there's also a certain amount of limitations you have to look at how much of a CBD that the patient is able to tolerate, depending on the certain conditions they have, how well they're able to metabolize, and etc. So that all depends on the product and things that you're looking at. So highlight, yes?
I just noticed that if I remember correctly, the Imbue product is 18.66 milligrams per mil versus your competitor that's like 40 milligrams per mil. I'm not concerned about how much is in the bottle, but how much are you dosing the patient? Is that not right about, your brand specifically, but tell how you compare your brand or a quality brand versus a not so high quality brand.
Okay, so that question, if you don't mind, I could answer that at the end because the CE session right now, so I can't specifically talk about certain brands, and Chuck will get very...
Talk about a good brand versus a less.
Okay, perfect. All right, so I don't want Chuck to get mad at me. So, but the difference is like you have to look at the overall the imprint on the bottle itself, right? If you get a good brand, it will describe what milligrams you're going to get per dropful or per ml, and it can be very difficult to look at because if you just look at a bottle again, just written down as 1,000 milligrams does not equal that you're getting 1,000 milligrams per dose. So you have to look at that as well, and this could be very misleading. And another thing is there is no dose comparison between a full spectrum product versus an isolate, right? You sometimes want to do that because we always have the understanding, like just give you an example, like difference between a dosing between a atorvastatin and a rosuvastatin. We know that it's more that 1-to-1 ratio, right? You could dose it up and down, but for a CBD product, it's very hard to do, and it's so patient specific. And so you have to work with the patients and find out what the key dosing they're able to tolerate and it's going to work well for them. Right? Just to give you an example, I had a patient who, I started the patient on a 25 milligram capsule, for instance, with a full spectrum. And the issue was that it was way too much for the patient, was because she was weighing 110 pounds, right? Even though she had severe insomnia issue, that was too high of a dose for her, right? That was a learning experience. I can't dose it too high on those patients. And just, there's no real clinical guideline to say, hey, you know what, for this amount of weight that you need to start this, there is none. So you're gonna have to do more that, trial and error part. And once you get to a level, you're able to really understand, hey, you know what, you need to work on this dose at this patient, at this ailment that they're having on, and as well as this certain amount of weight. And one of the things is that if you work with a good CBD company, they'll give you a certain amount of guidelines to kind of start on and some. And so, again, trial and error a lot of times, depending on the type of the CBD product you're working with, where it's been extracted, how it's been extracted, all plays into how the dosing is going to be so different with them. So it is confusing, but at the end of this, hopefully it will clarify everything else. So if you have specific questions about a certain CBD company, hold your thought, write it down. I'll be happy to answer those for you at the end. So going back to highlighting the entourage effect, there are studies available in looking at the difference between a CBD, or at least an isolate, versus a whole plant extract. For instance, for patients dealing with intractable pain, you saw that the whole plant, full spectrum, actually had a better activity in reducing pain compared to just using straight THC. Now obviously, in many cases, they use synthetic THC, but still is a single profile that you're looking at. And as well as they looked at the animal model study and saw that full spectrum cannabis produced a better linear response on effect to controlling pain as well. And this is very, very important. You don't want a product that you're using, all of a sudden you hit a plateau in response and you don't know what to do with the patient, right? You don't want that kind of happening. And especially when you're looking at a CBD isolate, I'll talk about the pharmacokinetic aspect of it later on, but it actually has a narrow therapeutic index. And so depending on where you lie within that bell curve shape, you could either overdose a patient, underdose, or you're going to get, you're going to hit a bullseye and get the right dose. But that could be very difficult, is one thing. And secondarily is that, yeah, you're going to hit a plateau in effectiveness, and you may have to stop that patient from using CBD for a little while until they get back to a certain amount of response. And as well as there's studies available looking at breast cancer model studies using the whole plant versus the THC. So again, there are documents available showing and highlighting that full spectrum is better in therapeutic response in many cases versus an isolate. Okay? And including isolates, I'm not bashing on it. There are different ways of utilizing it. There are places in time to use it as well. But in overall discussion, full spectrum shows a better therapeutic response. And look at the terpene profile. We talked about entourage effect. We talked about the phytocannabinoids. We also have to look at terpenes, the essential oils. If you see the right-hand side right now, different terpenes such as limonene, all those things end up having to work to produce different pharmacological effect in our body, right? And also work synergistically working with our phytocannabinoids as well. And this is the reason why it is so important to work with a full spectrum product when you're doing anything else. Look at the CBD product, and I'm quite sure a lot of you are experts on this, but I still want to define what a full spectrum product is, because I'm quite sure, again, some of you may not be selling CBD product and you might be wondering, what is this guy talking about full spectrum product, right? So full spectrum is extracted from the flowers and the trim of the plant itself. It provides the full 160 and more phytocannabinoids, so the plant chemical, plus the terpenes, which is essential oils, and fatty acids. And I mentioned about the overall 500 identified compounds you get from the plant. And then you actually have something called a broad spectrum, where you have a special process to remove that THC out of the full spectrum profile. This could be very important if you actually have a client actively getting drug tested. Right? If you have a federal worker or a police officer, etc., if they're getting actively tested and if they need some kind of a CBD product to help them, broad spectrum product can be very helpful. However, one key caveat that you have to learn about is looking at the actual C of A, or certificate analysis. And really, that company you're dealing with is able to guarantee that the THC is non-traceable, because a little bit of if THC can be accumulating for well over months to a year, and it can be detected, and you don't want that to be backfiring on you, and then, God forbid, that person end up having to get fired. Yes, sir?
One of the things you have to be careful of, too, is a lot of the drug tests are not differential tests.
Absolutely.
You can get a false positive on a THC-free product with a poor differential test. The cannabidiol structure and the THC structure are so similar, the test can't tell the difference. So you have to be really careful with that. I've had patients that the test, we tell all of our patients, we show them the difference between the two. You have to tell them that they better be finding out what kind of test the company's doing, or they will flag false positive.
That is true, and then one of the key topic that, I mean, obviously we don't have time to discuss it, but in terms of the overall drug testing that's actually happening right now in the United States, is that sometimes really necessary, right? I'm not saying not to test it, but the amount and then the overall, the limit of the THC that's being accepted right now, and having to flag it. Is that acceptable at this point in time? Because again, CBD is widely available, right? You have trace amounts of THC to begin with. So these are topics that we should be talking about with our lawmakers and as well as regulators, that, you know what, these are topics that should be discussed more and more. So going back, isolates, single cannabinoid profiles, just looking at single things of CBD, CBG, and CBN, those are things that can be available as well. So again, full spectrum, important, but one thing I want to also let you know, think about full spectrum as like the multivitamin for your endocannabinoid system, right? It's not just about the single profile, you're working with different receptors to really give you that benefit that you need, and then later on, especially in a serious scenarios, you may end up having to utilize different single isolates such as CBN or CBG to deal with severe pain or including an adjunctive therapy for cancer. So these are the things that's going to occur more and more in our practice, and we should be on the forefront to know about these things, so this way we are able to produce and as well as giving different options to our patients and as well as our physicians that we're working with. And going through that, you have the full spectrum we talked about. Now looking at the extraction science. This is the thing that's really, I want to talk about more and more, because there's such a misinformation about which is better. Matter of fact, there is no perfect way of which is better or not. Is the main question you have to look at, looking at extraction science, how to extract that phytocannabinoid or the terpenes out of the cannabis plant, is based on what are you trying to produce, is the main question you should be looking at, okay? And because there's no perfect extraction method, and to looking at this, there are two popular ways. I mean, you could talk about butane extraction as well, but I don't have much time to discuss that. But at least two main things I want to talk about. Ethanol extraction is one of the oldest ways of extracting to begin with. And especially within the apothecary world in the United States, we use ethanol extraction for the longest time until 1937, when the prohibition ended up having to occur. And then in terms of looking at the CO2 extraction, mainly invented by the Nazis, very interesting historical part. But now, within our beer industry, utilizes CO2 extraction to flavor our beer from hop. So this is basically a nice layout that I made for you. It took me a little time to really get everything into a one single chart and helping you differentiate different aspects of CO2 extraction and ethanol. So let's go through CO2 extraction. CO2 uses carbon dioxide, requires correct temperature and pressure. So you need a right environment to extract it. It is clean, it is safe, right? It's not volatile. However, it is non-polar and non-soluble. As a result, it's very picky in terms of which type of phytocannabinoids or terpenes it's able to extract. As a result, at the end, one of the processes end up having to do is utilizing ethanol at the end to flush out whatever they can to get out of the benefits you get from the phytocannabinoids and to add in additional things to get it into balance. And also, because you're utilizing a certain amount of temperature and pressure, it also drastically changes the chemical composition of the plant itself. So it changes the profile, right? So again, what are you trying to produce is the biggest question you have to look at. I'm not saying that this is a bad thing, but this is the nature of the extraction process. At the same time, it actually has a different flavor profile when you're using CO2. Whereas ethanol extraction, it uses alcohol. Okay, in doing that, it's clean, it's the safest. Unfortunately, it takes a lot of room because you have to keep, jugs of ethanol to extract it. But it's one of the complete and is able to be done safely because you can actually evaporate ethanol out. Whereas, again, I'm not talking about butane, but butane, it's another extraction process, is very volatile gas, can be very dangerous. So CO2 and ethanol tends to be the safest, but one of the key things about ethanol is that it's more that complete extraction process because it actually has a polar body in nature, is able to bond to water along with the fat soluble within the plant to get the fatty acids, the terpenes, and the phytocannabinoids to purify that hemp resin that you're looking for. So again, this is an ideal extraction process to get a good full spectrum product, okay? And also it produces somewhat of a bitter taste because you're taking all that things out along with the some of the plant residues as well. So these are key difference between a CO2 extraction and ethanol extraction. And following that extraction process, now we could talk about dosage forms. There are different dosage forms available, right? Such as tinctures, right? This is a more the popular ways of doing it. This is probably one of the key things that's been produced early on back in 2014 when the hemp was actually legal to produce and making CBD products. They utilize different carrier oils like MCT oil or coconut oil. And the issue is that when you're using a full spectrum product, and especially using different carrier oil like this, because I told you about how full spectrum products can be bitter, you got to mask that taste, right? You got to add in different flavors in there as well. And so that in itself can actually also taint the quality of the CBD product. So you have to look at the formulation behind the maker that's making it and ask the right question in terms of what else are you doing to alter the taste, and is that going to alter the overall efficacy of the finished product in itself? So the product that I really like to use is not using MCT oil or coconut oil, is using palm fruit glycerin. Okay, it's glycerin based because of palm fruit as a natural forming sugar. It is able to mask that bitterness of the full spectrum oil. At the same time, is able to absorb better because of the sugar molecule embedded within the phytocannabinoid extraction that you have, and you get a better overall taste and efficacy you're looking for without sacrificing the efficacy by adding in other additives there. Capsules. It is probably the slowest onset of delivery. So if you're looking for a sustained effectiveness of a product, capsule tends to be better. So if you're dealing with a patient dealing with serious pain issue, along with maybe patients are dealing with neuropathy, or including patients actually having issue with insomnia, anxiety issues, capsule tends to be better in certain cases because you have that sustained effectiveness as well. And oil tends to be breaking down slower within your gut system. Gummies are another good forms of doing it. You get both the mucosa and the gut absorption. And you got to look at gummies as well. Are they using, good products and ingredients in there to make those gummies? Because sometimes they end up having to add in tons of sugar in there, and that's not really beneficial, right? You're trying to get the best out of the cannabis products possible. When you have jam-packed with sugar, that's not good at all. So again, things to ask for. Topical creams, lotions, and ointments, great way to help with the local treatments of pain and dermatological issues. Your question, sir?
Yeah. In regards to the gummies versus capsules, since it's both oral absorption, can you elaborate on the mucosal absorption that you get from a gummy versus a different oral formulation?
That's a great question to ask, because I wish I actually had a pharmacokinetic profile to tell you in terms of which is more effectiveness. However, you got to understand that, even if you decide to work with a buccal or a sublingual tablet, you get a mucosal absorption. At the same time, it's never 100% mucosal absorption. You get ingestion anyway. Just take it for instance like a Klonopin sublingual tablet. Yeah, you get a quick absorption within the mucosal route, but you still get a systemic absorption to the gut anyway. So that's the thing. But one of the key things that I really like to use gummies in my clinical practice is, let's just say a patient actually has a need for a breakthrough pain during the day, and if you need to really microdose these patients, gummies, depending on how it's shaped, you could cut it in 4 ways or whatever you want to do, and then just give them a little bit of dose throughout the day to help deal with the pain that they have. So it's just more of a convenience part. So sometimes I end up having to give them, a 25 milligram capsules along with the gummies, and the gummies they will end up having to use it during the day. Capsules more that pain control that you may need in the evening. And then you could also utilize topical products just to give you that breakthrough pain at the same time. So, you got to be creative, right? One thing is that I have a compounding pharmacy background. So using different dosage forms and working with different patients dealing with pain, it was very refreshing for me to use that skill set in translating and using CBD products. So if you're already doing compounding already, this is a great way to get into additional means to producing income as well as other avenues to help your patients. Vapor cartridges, I don't really recommend it anymore these days. It is a quick onset, but depending on how the manufacturers make it, you actually have different cutters and as well as different solvents such as propylene glycol, which can be very volatile in nature. When you burn it, at the same time, you've seen pictures of popcorn lung, right? Where the lungs are completely damaged. Yeah, those are things that you want to avoid, and I don't really particularly like that, and as well as the fact that I stopped selling vapor cartridges in our pharmacy. People look for it, I just stopped selling it. Now, kief, bubble hash, and CBD rosin, these are more recreational part of it, but you should know what those are, so I'm going to just leave it there. But if you look at kief is probably one of the oldest form of CBD product out there. Especially in the Middle East, they used to take the flowers of the cannabis plant, and they'll take a fine mash and scrape off all that trichome and make into a powder. And you could use that to smoke it, either make into a roll or whatever you want to, or smoking pipe, whatever you need to do. That will utilize that to smoke it. Again, recreational part, long part of our history, right? I don't know why it's being stigmatized that it's such a bad thing to utilize these things, but again, safe, is effective, as well as a great ways to utilize these things in different ways. So just take it as a for your information, and these are things that they could probably end up to ask. Indication for CBD, I'm quite sure this is something you really want to know about. How do I get the CBD product to my patients, and then which forms of indications can I utilize it for? So there's a pie chart. I don't think I have enough time to explain everything else, but looking at it, this is actually shows you that CBD actually holds the largest pie chart within the realm of different phytocannabinoid profile you actually have right now, right? CBD in general actually probably holds at least around 40% of the activity in dealing with vasodilation, providing anti-ischemic effect, neuroprotective, antiemetic, right, anti-epileptic, everything else. But if you look at it right now, all the way in the bottom, you also have different cannabinoid profile that actually has a similar effective as well. Why I'm actually pointing it out is you actually have that synergistic effect between different profiles. Again, the word entourage effect is very important, not just looking at the single CBD isolate, but you want to look at the whole plant approach in producing that. At the same time, different parts of these cannabinoid profile work with different sub-receptors within the endocannabinoid system that we still have not gotten full information of, but just know that all these things are beneficial for our body and producing different effectiveness as well. So indication-wise, we know epilepsy and seizure disorders, right? There's a drug already out there approved by the FDA. Mechanism of action is really unknown, but one thing that we're thinking is that it actually helps to modulate the endogenous system, such as a neuronal inhibition, as well as working with the adenosine modulation as well. Looking at sleep and anxiety, there are large case studies looking at how CBD can actually help to decrease anxiety and sleep complaints. At the same time, for public speakers out there, it reverses the anxiogenic effect of THC, right? And so this could be used, and you could use CBD right before you end up having to talk on stage like this. I didn't take CBD today, but so I just want to point it out. If you have patients taking Xanax or benzodiazepines, CBD can be a great adjunctive thing to add on. I do have a client who's been utilizing benzodiazepines since he was 17 years old, and after utilizing CBD for about a year and a half or so, he was able to get off of Xanax completely. Right? So there are successful studies. Again, it's anecdotal again, but you could bring success and relief and as well solution for your patients out there. Along with, if you have patients, especially vets who are actually dealing with PTSD issues, there's a recent study back in 2016 showing that CBD can actually modulate your fear memory by working with the mesolimbic system. Right? There's pure data and science behind these things that you could end up having to recommend and giving patients a better solution rather than working with just pharmacological things that we sell right now, right? We know that, one of the key issue, and especially as an independent pharmacy owner, is always about reimbursement, right? We always worry about how much we're getting paid, how much we're getting ripped off from the DIR fees, and et cetera. We could mitigate that issue. Matter of fact, we could actually provide a better solution rather than just dispensing pharmacy, a drug-related solution by utilizing CBD products like this. That's going to really give you that bigger impact in patients' lives. So I hope you guys take that into account, really hold it in, and then, when you get back to your pharmacy on Monday, you're able to do a better job in producing this type of results for your patients. Inflammation and immunomodulatory effect, right? I talked about how the CB2 receptor is a lot more expressed within the immune system, how CBD is working indirectly to activate and help to modulate that issue dealing with the immune system. Anti-inflammatory effect is able to disrupt the functionality issue of autoimmune disease as well, such as lupus, psoriatic arthritis, and there are studies available looking at CBD help to decrease the overall keratinocytes. That's one of the key issues dealing with the psoriatic arthritis. So CBD can be very helpful. You can use it topically, at the same time use it orally as well, because you need some form of absorption within the gut to work different ways in our system, but also using that topical CBD product to immediately relieve some of the issues that the patient's already dealing with. Cancer is another thing that we could talk about, more and more. Obviously, there's a small studies right now looking at in vivo, in vitro, but even what we are looking at right now is that, yes, it is immunomodulatory. At the same time, because different single profiles of cannabinoids, especially CBD and also CBN, in the near future, what I strongly believe is that there's going to be a targeted cancer cell line studies available that you could use like different cannabinoid profiles along with the chemotherapy to really lock it in and treat these patients and able to decrease the overall side effects the patient dealing with. So this way the therapy is better. At the same time, the side effect is less. Neuroprotective effect. One thing, bottom point I want to make a note, is that the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services holds a patent titled Cannabinoids as Antioxidants and Neuroprotectiveness. Why this is so important is that even though the federal government actually has a patent on the CBD aspect of it, the FDA still has not come out in terms of giving us a rule and guideline how to regulate the CBD process. They keep saying that it's not safe, it's not effective. So I don't get this. There's a lot of issues that goes into play, but again, the federal government already recognizes it is already effective in terms of producing an antioxidant effect and neuroprotectiveness, and it could be used for potential issue dealing with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and Huntington's disease, and CBD exerts a great effect, and the federal government recognizes it. But why isn't it legalized even sooner? Because this patent was not happening yesterday, it happened a while ago, right? Again, there's a lot of issue that goes on that it should be talked about more, but hope you guys are able to take this account and question a lot more from now on. So conclusion of the cannabidiol effect, all those listing over there for you guys to look at. Dosing on the CBD. Now this is the key thing that the gentleman there was asking about. And I want to talk about the dosing profile of a CBD isolate and the full spectrum. And the reason why it is so hard for me to say which milligrams or what product should be used to treat what. The main thing we look at right now is the CBD isolate. I told you about is a bell curve shape, is a narrow therapeutic index. So depending on where you lie between the low and a high dose, you could actually have no effect or having side effects, or you get a perfect outline of how you get a therapeutic response of it. The problem with the CBD isolate is that you can end up having to achieve a plateau, a therapeutic plateau where the patient's not responding at all to a CBD isolate because the receptors are completely saturated, right? You're doing only one single receptor. Whereas if you look at a full spectrum extract, it tends to show a direct response between a dose increase, okay, and as well as no upper limit or hitting that response plateau I just mentioned to you before. So that's because of entourage effect. And full spectrum oil, when you're working with them, patients are able to take a higher dose and titrate rapidly without risking a overshooting of dose of therapeutic response. You can't really overdose on those things, right? If you do end up having to take a large dose, the most you could probably end up to do is that you get a headache and you end up having to fall asleep, okay? You get very relaxed and you fall asleep. That's probably the most effect you're gonna get out of it. But if you look at it right now, that's a key difference in terms of pharmacological profile, especially the kinetic profile, that the full spectrum, if you are dealing with a serious ailment, you want to get a linear response of a dosing, so this way you're not worried about if a certain dose I'm going to give the patient, you're not going to see any response, or the patient's going to have side effects. So again, pick the right product when you're going to be doing it, and you're going to see a big difference in terms of how the patients are going to respond. And patients has to go through a process of trial and error to get the correct dosing. I mentioned to you before about the challenge behind that as well. So how do you market your CBD product in your community? I told you about, I started this a few years ago out of more of a necessity and everything else. So one thing, this is one of the things that I did. Now I'm quite sure you guys do much more differently, and you guys probably have a successful practice as well. But this is what I did. So what I first decided to do was direct marketing my CBD practice to the doctor's offices. And especially if you are able to find which doctors are already having the ability to write for medical marijuana, go to them. Tell them that you actually carry a good CBD products that you could market to their patients as well. Because depending on their patients, they may not like medical marijuana at all, or maybe the effectiveness is too much for them. So they want a different alternative. Well, a good hemp-based CBD product, a full spectrum CBD product, can be a great way to produce that solution for them, right? So, and as well as market to your pain specialists, rheumatologists, right, your GI specialists, etc., and as well as know your science on CBD. What I mentioned to you about the endocannabinoid system, learn about it, right? There's more articles out there you could learn, right? If you're working with a great CBD company, they will also educate on this aspect as well, right? The issue is that a lot of times CBD companies, they sell a product and not teach you how to sell it, or not teach you the overall science behind phytocannabinoid medicine, and so you need to work with a good company. Also, you become a highly sought after phytocannabinoid specialist. Patient seminars are a must. Education, education, education. You need to teach your patients about how and what CBD is and how that could be beneficial for them, right? So one night you could actually talk about pain. One evening you could talk about a support group for for patients dealing with MS or maybe rheumatoid, whatever you want to do. You have avenues and times you can work with them. Now, obviously, because of COVID happening right now, that you may have to do a virtual run, but you could still work with these groups to market your CBD practice, right? Including if you have patients already dealing with eczema or psoriasis for that matter, sell them a jar of CBD ointment together. So this way, there's a synergistic effect of the effectiveness they're looking at. Also, if you have a social media presence, if you have a marketer, work with Facebook groups as well as Instagram, right? What I did was I marketed my practice to the low-dose naltrexone group on Facebook, talked about CBD, and that's how I got the traction, right? So there are already patient groups out there on social media that you should be reaching out to from day one. And you could provide an Instagram page. And one thing that I do, if you have Instagram page, please follow me. I would greatly appreciate it. And one thing that I've done was when I started that CBD-based educational Instagram page at first. And I got really good traction out of it, but now actually more expanding onto the functional medicine and the naturopathic world now. But that's how I got started, right? That's how I got that repertoire and able to work with different patient groups and as well as doctors. And that was one of the key points of success. And right now, this particular unit that I have on right now, this is completely AI driven. It's following me around based on where my face is. What I'm doing is I'm trying to build up content about a CBD products that I'm actually talking about, and I'm going to utilize this to market on my Instagram page, right? So again, take the opportunity, make the videos, make the content, make the graphics, educate your public, and this is the key thing that made a humongous difference into my success in doing CBD in my pharmacy. Now, you might ask, why should I get involved in this? Well, one of the things is that we are probably one of the sought-after experts. We're very easily accessible, as well as we have the key and the knowledge of which dosage forms may end up having to work well in using different pharmaceuticals. Well, you could translate that into CBD is a win-win for us, right? As well as you have patients dealing with some of the complex conditions as well. So you are able to talk to them, you know what kind of medication they're on, and you could end up having to really educate them about what the CBD could be beneficial for them, and as well as you have a chance to upsell your products in your pharmacy. And pharmacists can work with their patients and physicians to provide that triad relationship. Again, that whole word, triad relationship, is so well known within the compounding pharmacy world. Well, if you're just doing regular retail, that's fine. You should take into account that triad relationship now and utilizing CBD practice in your pharmacy and work with your patient and your doctor to produce that ideal outcome and the health benefit that they're looking for. And as well as if you are a compounding pharmacy and if you're not doing low-dose naltrexone on top of utilizing CBD can be very beneficial for patients dealing with severe ailments such as pain and as well as autoimmune disorders and etc. So we do this together. So when we dispense naltrexone, we dispense a bottle of CBD or topical CBD, and that's like the basic repertoire that we built up with our some of the specialists in our area. So what should I be looking for in a CBD company? If you're already working with a CBD company, great. What you should be doing is take this list and then just test it out. Am I asking all these questions in terms of the company that I'm already working with? If you're not, you should ask these questions, because that's going to really differentiate whether you actually have a good brand that you're working with or you're getting ripped off. Okay? So foremost thing, you need to ask about the source of the hemp. You want to get a high quality hemp. You should ask where the hemp is grown, how it's grown, is it organically grown, is it sustainably grown, as well as are you testing your soil of the soil content, right? Hemp in itself is a bioaccumulator, okay? It extracts all that stuff out of the soil. And especially that nuclear reactor issue that happened in Fukushima and as well as in Ukraine, what they had done is they planted hemp along that area to suck up that nuclear waste. If you know that that's already working, wouldn't you want to know about how the hemp quality is based on where they're growing it? Right? You might be smoking nuclear waste, for all I know. Right? You should ask. You should always ask. Right? Ask. You should always ask. And if they can't answer, I don't know. You might have to ask different question about maybe I should work with a different CBD company. Extraction process of hemp is very important as well, right? We talked about CO2 extraction as well as ethanol extraction. You have to ask about what finished products you're looking for, as well as the rigorous third-party testing as well. We talked about the potential issue dealing with mycotoxin, right? How it could be detrimental for a patient's health. You should always ask for, are they able to guarantee the strength and the terpene profile in the body, in the bottle, as well as is it safe for your patients, right? Heavy metal testing, solvent testing, microbial testing, insecticides, and other contaminants. Are they able to produce that for you? Are they also testing that per lot? Because what I see is that when you go to the CBD company websites, they list out the testing, but then they only list the one lot number for some reason. And then when you ask for different lot numbers that they produce, they're like, well, we can't produce that at all. So that's one way to differentiate whether you have a good brand or not, because every batch that they make, they should be sending that out to a third-party company and test it for you. And that should not be incurring any extra cost on your CBD product. They should not. They should be guaranteeing the overall effectiveness as well as the safety of your product. As well as, one thing that I didn't add here, if you work with a CBD company, they also should be putting a QR code on their bottle or in their package. So easily you could take your cell phone, scan it, and that quality assurance testing or the C of A should be readily available for you rather than trying to get through different websites and firewalls to get it, because that's what happens a lot of times with CBD companies as well. One thing that is really eye-opening for me is that back in 2019, before all this pandemic actually occurred, I was traveling to several other CBD events, and you had hundreds and hundreds of CBD companies out there showcasing how good their product is and everything else, but then when you get down to the testing modality like this, they couldn't answer. This is the biggest boatload of crap that you're dealing with a lot of times, and so you do need to ask the right question. The next question you should be asking is, where do they manufacture finish your product, right? Do they produce in the United States? Do they produce somewhere else? And who are their processing company? Because you could easily spend $2,000 to $5,000 and work with a white label company to private label for you. Does that mean that you have a quality product? Maybe, maybe not. But you should ask this question, right? And these are things that we get fooled by, just looking at a fancy bottle. As well as CBD companies should be also committed to delivering a clinical grade product that are sold to healthcare professionals. Why am I mentioning that? You could now buy CBD product at a gas station. You could go to 7-Eleven and buy CBD products. Okay, I'm not going to mention any names of a brand, but you could buy a popular, well-known CBD brands at 7-Eleven. Do you want to sell that kind of brand in your pharmacy? What's differentiating you versus a cashier at 7-Eleven? Right? You should always look for a clinically driven, a pharmaceutical grade, basically, CBD product in your store, as well as having all those data to back up what you're selling. And companies should not also produce or sell inhalation products as well. You should get away from that, right? And at the same time, companies should actually have a strong customer service. And one of the key things I mentioned about before, education, education, education. You need to find a company that's going to give you the overall educational backing to help you sell the product. And another thing is, they should not be selling that educational material to you. They should be giving it to you. Okay? Not saying that they should give you everything for free. I'm not saying that. But the thing is, these should be coming together. I know some companies, they end up having to charge you $300 to $500 or even more to get that educational packet. You shouldn't be that way, right? That should be readily available for you. And the finished product should be backed by science, innovation, and research. So that's basically my conclusion of my talk. I appreciate your time. My name is Dr. John Kim, and if you need to reach out to me, you could email me or you can follow my Instagram, and I will open this floor up for a Q&A. Email? Which state do you live in?
I have a copy of the actual inspection where they required our pharmacy to actually have the email of the manufacturer on the product label. Okay. And we're forced to not sell it now at the pharmacy until we get that done.
Which state do you?
Texas.
Really? Huh.
I have copies of it.
And who was the inspector? Was it a Board of Pharmacy? The state.
Before we had to, here in the state of Texas, we had to apply for licensure to be able to sell that products. So they came to my pharmacy, the people who we are required to licensure with, and they inspected my pharmacy saying we need to have the manufacturer email on the product label to sell it. Okay.
I mean, one thing about some of the thing to bypass that is through the QR code, and that QR code should provide you the C of A is one thing, but then also the email, the contact, who to contact, and etc. should be available. I'm just a little surprised that the regulators are going far as email. What's email going to do? Why don't you just put a phone number there, right? What's the difference? What is the difference? What is the difference? I mean, I might as well put my Instagram page on it, in the bottom as well, right? But no, I don't know why. That's a good question to ask. Sometimes these inspectors, they go a little overboard a lot of times. But is that written within the regulation in Texas?
Yes. That's not my understanding. I provided 3 pages of recommendations to the state agency when they were drafting those guidelines and everything, and I paid careful attention to them. I think if they have an overzealous inspector there, and I may be wrong, and I'll be glad to admit if I am, but I don't believe that that's in the law. I don't believe it's in the law. I believe you.
No, I'm just saying, I mean, it's a family license where I can't sell.
I'll check the regs. I have them on my computer. I'll check it and see if maybe you've got someone that's mistaken in there, but if not, it's my understanding in Texas that the basic requirement is that you have to have either a web address, a URL, or a QR code that takes you directly to information about the COA for that product. And you need to have the name of the manufacturer has to be either on the bottle, the tube, the container, or the package that it comes in.
And another thing about the QR code, I think that started in Indiana, because they're trying to differentiate between brands and the quality and and then also production of C of A, which a lot of companies weren't able to do. So, that also ensures what you're getting, right? At least you get that information right off the bat. You shouldn't be waiting for certain information to be given to you by the manufacturer. So I'm a little surprised that that's following through, especially Texas.
So I'll say regarding what happened with this stuff, John, give me your thoughts on all this new infused double 18 with the CBD products, what are your thoughts on all that?
Well, it's all depending on the limitation of it. I think it's all state by state in terms of the regulation as well. There are places in time to utilize that form of THC, but we'll see how that's going to be. I don't have a real good opinion about that right now. Again, there's a place and time to utilizing it. One thing that I've been actually more looking at right now is bringing in CBN and CBG extracts. I know the company that I'm working with right now, they already have a professional line that's going to come out with CBN and CBG already added to it. So that's going to really bump up that cannabinoid profile and really differentiate how effective it is, working with different therapies. So we'll see.
Hey John, could you do me a favor and flip the slides one slide forward? It's got the web address where they're do the evaluation there. And when you guys are doing your online evaluation, just enter APEX, APEX with a password, get into it, that works. If anybody else has a question? Yes. I'll have these things posted online within a day or two, and I'll give everybody the link. Any other questions? Raise your hand. I've got a microphone.
And one thing I'd like to really make myself available, if you have any question about dosing, if you have any tough cases that you're working with on your patients right now, feel free to, talk to me after the talk. I'd be happy to direct you and how to tackle certain cases, because like I said, I've been doing this for few years already, and it's just the overall clinical experience you get, and that's going to really make a humongous difference in your patients' lives. So, yes. Actually, Chuck is going to be posting that in a day or two, he says. Yeah. If he doesn't, you could go after him.
Anybody else have a question? A lot of fantastic information here, folks. Let's give John a big hand.
Thank you.